There is a particular kind of morning that some people know too well. You open your eyes, and before you even fully surface from sleep, you already know exactly what the day holds. The same light through the same window, the same sounds from the same corner of the house, the same cup, the same chair, the same quiet. And somewhere underneath all of that familiar comfort, a small voice whispers something you don't quite want to hear. Is this it? Again. This isn't about hating your life. That's the important thing to say first, before anything else. People who feel this way often have lives they chose deliberately. The calm, the low social noise, the predictability. They didn't stumble into this quietness by accident. They built it, or at least arrived at it with some relief. And yet something starts to feel off. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would make a good story at a dinner party. Just quietly, persistently, like a song that's been on loop so long, you've forgotten there were other songs. There are people who describe it as a kind of Groundhog Day, not the comedic version, but the existential undertone of that film. The feeling that time is passing, certainly, but nothing is actually moving. Same house, same path, if you leave at all. Same thoughts arriving in the same order by Tuesday afternoon. Same face in the mirror, same worries at night, same small pleasures unfolding in the same sequence. And then sometimes, a moment of vertigo. They look up and realize an entire year has gone by, and they cannot name a single thing that felt genuinely different from the year before. Not one morning that surprised them, not one afternoon that asked something new of them. This is the experience we are sitting with today, not as a diagnosis, not as a problem to be solved with a motivational checklist, but as something real, something that deserves to be named carefully and understood with compassion. Because people who feel this way are not lazy, they are not broken, they are not failures at living. They are often people with a particular kind of sensitivity, people for whom the outside world is genuinely costly, socially and energetically, who built a protected life because they needed to, and now they find themselves asking a harder question. Did I build a refuge, or did I build a cage? That question deserves a real answer. And that's exactly what we're going to explore here. Here's the part almost no one explains clearly enough. The psychology of repetition for sensitive, introverted, socially cautious people is not the same as the psychology of repetition for everyone else. For someone who finds the world energizing, sameness feels boring. They crave novelty. They seek stimulation. They get restless without external change. But for you, it's different. Sameness was once a solution. It was the answer to a world that was too loud, too demanding, too socially exhausting. Predictability wasn't a trap. It was medicine. The problem is that medicine, taken indefinitely in the same dose for the same original pain, sometimes stops healing and starts numbing. Psychologically, what begins as protective stability can gradually shift into what researchers call behavioral rigidity, a pattern where the nervous system, trained to avoid discomfort, starts avoiding not just pain, but growth, surprise, and aliveness itself. The routines that once felt like a soft landing slowly harden into a kind of invisible enclosure. And the cruelest part, from the outside, and sometimes even from the inside, it doesn't look like anything is wrong. The house is tidy. The days run smoothly. There is no crisis. There is no breakdown. There is just this strange flatness, this whisper of is time still moving, this quiet terror of looking back and finding only copies of copies of copies. This is where Schopenhauer becomes unexpectedly useful. Schopenhauer, who is often misread as a simple pessimist, actually saw something profound about the nature of human suffering. He wrote that we oscillate, as humans, between two poles, pain and boredom. We suffer when life pushes against us too hard, and we suffer differently, more quietly, more insidiously, when nothing pushes at all. He understood that boredom in its deepest form, existential boredom, the kind that lives underneath the surface of ordinary days, is not a minor inconvenience. It is a signal from the interior of a life that something real is missing. Not happiness, necessarily, but meaning, movement, the sense that this moment is not identical to all the ones before it. Schopenhauer also believed that most people run from this kind of inner emptiness into distraction, noise, busyness, endless social performance. But for introspective people, those distractions rarely work. The scrolling doesn't satisfy. The passive consumption doesn't fill the space. The sameness just continues, now with background noise added. What he pointed toward, and what we'll return to before the end, is that the way out of this loop is not more stimulation from outside. It is depth reached from within. A different kind of movement. Interior movement. But we'll get there. I want to tell you a small story. There was a woman, let's call her Marta, who spent most of her 30s carefully constructing a life she could finally breathe in. She left a demanding job. She stopped attending social events she never wanted to attend. She moved to a quieter neighborhood. She arranged her days around her energy. Slow mornings, focused afternoons, evenings with books and silence. It worked. For a while, it was genuinely relief. But somewhere around her 42nd year, something shifted. She noticed she could predict her own thoughts before she had them. She noticed her journal entries from January looked almost identical to the ones from November. Same worries, same half-formed hopes, same questions left unanswered. She noticed that when someone asked, "What's new?" she had nothing to say. Not because nothing had happened, but because the texture of every day had become so smooth, so uniform, that there were no edges to grab onto. She didn't know what to call it. Depression. She didn't feel sad exactly. Loneliness. She had chosen to be alone. Regret. She didn't want a different life exactly. She just wanted this life to feel like it was going somewhere, even quietly, even slowly, even in a direction that no one else could see or measure. I have sat with that feeling myself. The feeling of waking up inside a life that fits you perfectly, and somehow, precisely because it fits so well, has stopped surprising you. There is a strange grief in that, not the grief of loss, the grief of stillness. Marta eventually understood something important, something it took her longer to see than she would have liked. She understood that she hadn't been living inside her life. She had been maintaining it, like tending a machine, keeping it running smoothly, preventing breakdowns, ensuring the fuel didn't run out. But maintenance is not the same as inhabiting, and there is a world of difference between a life that is stable and a life that is genuinely, quietly alive. The life she had built was real, it was hers. But somewhere along the way, she had stopped being a participant in it and become its caretaker instead. Here is what I want you to hold for a moment, because it matters deeply. The sensitivity that made you need this quiet life, that same sensitivity is also the thing that will not let you sleepwalk through it. Schopenhauer understood this about people with rich inner lives. They are, paradoxically, more prone to the particular suffering of emptiness. Precisely because their interior world is so active, so hungry for something real to engage with, shallow stimulation doesn't satisfy them. But shallow repetition tortures them in its own slow, quiet, almost imperceptible way. An erosion of aliveness that happens so gradually, you almost miss it. This is not a flaw. This is a compass. The discomfort you feel when you sense the days blurring into one another, that is not anxiety without a cause. That is your inner life telling you it needs something more than maintenance. It needs encounter, not necessarily with other people, not necessarily with the world in its loudest form, but with something that is genuinely new, even in a small way, something that asks something different of you, something that makes this Tuesday feel, even slightly, like it belongs to its own moment in time. People like you, people who feel things deeply, who need quiet to function, who are drained by social performance, are not people who need the world's stimulation. You need your own depths. And the loop you feel trapped in is often a sign that you've been skimming the surface of yourself, not going down. That is the reframing this experience deserves. Not, something is wrong with you for wanting a quiet life, but your quiet life is asking for more of you, not less. If we go one layer deeper, something important appears, and it changes how you understand yourself. The experience of feeling trapped in sameness rarely arrives without history. For many people who live quietly, who need this kind of protected life, there were earlier years, sometimes decades, of trying to live differently, of trying to keep up, of performing energy they didn't have, social ease they couldn't feel, enthusiasm for a kind of life that never quite fit. They showed up to the parties, they made the small talk, they smiled through the dinners and said, "We should do this again," when every part of them was desperate to go home. And those years left their mark. They taught the nervous system something very clear. The world out there costs too much. Stay small. Stay still. Don't reach out too far. It only ends in exhaustion, in the feeling of being fundamentally wrong somehow. So the sameness is not just habit. It is, in part, a scar, a very understandable one. The rigidity of the loop, the same path, the same chair, the same thoughts in the same order, is not laziness dressed up as routine. It is a careful system of self-protection that was built by someone who had genuinely been hurt by reaching too far, too many times, in a direction that was never really theirs. Schopenhauer would say that the will, that deep, driving force inside every human being, doesn't disappear when we stop engaging with the world. It turns inward, and if it finds nothing to move toward, nothing to reach for, it begins to consume itself in a low, persistent restlessness. That restlessness isn't meaningless. It's the will reminding you it's still there, still asking for direction. Understanding this doesn't mean the loop is good for you. It means you can be tender with yourself as you begin to question it. You are not battling laziness. You are in a slow, careful conversation with your own history, and that deserves patience, not judgment. This is where most people completely misunderstand themselves, and it's worth pausing here to make some things clear. There is a difference between routine and repetition as anesthesia, and it matters enormously. Routine is rhythm. It is the morning ritual that grounds you, the walk that helps you think, the evening practice that marks the end of a day with a quiet sense of completion. Routine is structure in service of life. It holds you steady, so you can move from within it. Repetition as anesthesia is different. It is doing the same things not because they nourish you, but because they require nothing. Because they don't ask you to show up fully. Because they fill the hours without costing you anything. And quietly, without giving you much back. One keeps you rooted, the other keeps you frozen. And the difference between them is not always visible from the outside. It has to be felt from the inside. There is also a difference between solitude and hiding, and this distinction is one of the most important you can learn to recognize in yourself. Solitude is the conscious choice to be with yourself, with your thoughts, your creativity, your inner life, because that is where you genuinely find restoration and depth. It is an active state, even when it looks still from the outside. You are present, you are listening to yourself. Something is happening inside, even in the silence. Hiding is solitude without presence. It is being alone, but not truly being with yourself. It is filling the hours with enough passive stimulation, scrolling, watching, half reading, that you never quite have to sit with the question your life is quietly asking you. Many people living inside the loop are technically alone, but not truly in solitude. They are, without fully realizing it, hiding from depth inside comfortable shallowness. You deserve to know which one you're in on any given day. Not with judgment, but with honesty. Now, and please hear this as a gentle invitation, not a directive. Here are some real quiet ways to introduce movement into a life that has become too smooth. The first is what I'd call deliberate noticing. Not dramatic change, just choosing, once a day, to do one ordinary thing with full attention. Make tea and actually taste it. Walk the familiar route and look at it as if you've never been there before. Read a paragraph and sit with it for 5 minutes instead of moving immediately to the next. This is not productivity. This is presence, and presence breaks the loop more powerfully than novelty ever does. The second is interior direction. Ask yourself, genuinely with patience, what is one small thing you have wanted to do, or explore, or return to, that you have been quietly postponing? Not a life overhaul. One small thing, a subject you've been curious about, a skill you've set aside for years, a question you've been circling but never sitting down with. Give that thing 15 minutes. Schopenhauer's antidote to existential emptiness was not frantic action. It was will directed towards something real. Even quietly, even slowly, even in a small corner of a Tuesday afternoon. The third is changing one small texture. Not your whole life, just one thing. A different chair, a new book from a genre you haven't tried, a message sent to someone you haven't spoken to in too long, a different time to step outside when the light falls at a slightly different angle. Small variations in the physical texture of your days send a quiet signal to the nervous system that time is actually moving, that not every day is a carbon copy of the one before. The fourth, and perhaps the most important, is asking yourself one honest question and sitting with it long enough to hear a real answer. What am I not doing because I genuinely don't want to? And what am I not doing because I'm afraid of what it would stir up? That distinction is everything. It is the difference between protecting your peace and hiding from your own life. You can have a quiet life and still feel it moving. You can stay close to home and still grow. You can need very little social contact and still have a life that feels like it is going somewhere. Not somewhere dramatic, not somewhere the world would applaud, but somewhere yours. The version of you this is pointing toward doesn't need a transformation. They need a kind of waking up, not into a different life, but into this one, more fully. They notice the days again. They have a small direction they are moving in. They feel the difference between a Tuesday in January and a Tuesday in March. Not because dramatic things happened, but because they were present enough to register what was actually there. Your sensitivity is not the enemy of your aliveness. It is the very thing that makes depth possible. The loop you've been in was built for protection, and at some point, protection becomes enough, and it becomes possible to ask for something more, not louder, not more social, not more visible to the world, just more real, more present, more genuinely and unmistakably yours. That is not too much to ask of a quiet life. That is exactly what a quiet life at its best is for. And there is one more question this conversation leaves quietly at the threshold, one we haven't fully opened yet. Because once you begin to sense that your days can hold more aliveness, more direction, more interior movement, a different fear tends to surface. Not the fear of sameness anymore, but the fear of change itself. The quiet terror of disrupting the stability you work so hard to build. The worry that if you reach for more depth, more growth, more genuine presence inside your own life, you might somehow lose the peace you finally found. That fear, the fear of wanting more from your own life without losing what you've so carefully protected, is a different kind of story. And it unfolds in the next quiet conversation. Alone together. A quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections.